The second part of this worksheet is all about the quadratic formula. Even though these can be solved using factoring also, we're asked to use the specific method of the quadratic formula. And right here would be the quadratic formula from the notes. And I will work out these questions. There's not enough space on the worksheet, so I'm going to use some loose leaf. So the first question in this set is that we want to find the solutions of m squared minus 5m minus 14 equals 0. The first step would to be identify a, b, and c. A would be 1 since it's the coefficient of the m squared term. The b would be a negative 5 since it's the coefficient of the m to the first power term. And the constant would be a negative 14. We're going to substitute our values into the equation. An important thing to realize is that first we had to ensure that this was in standard form and it was equal to 0. So we already had that set up for us. That would be the first thing you would have to verify. Then find your values like we just did, and now make your substitutions. X is equal to a negative b, so we're taking a negative, the b value is already negative, so we're going to take a negative 5 plus or minus the square root of b squared. It's important to put the b value in parentheses. Square that value. Subtract 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is a negative 14. That square root has to extend all over that. We divide this entire expression by 2 times the a value, which is 1 in this case. Next line, x is equal to a negative 5 would be a positive 5, plus or minus. The square root symbol comes down, and let's evaluate what's inside. Negative 5 squared would be a positive 25. It's negative 5 times negative 5. That's why those parentheses were crucial. And then we're subtracting 4 times 1 times negative 14. 4 times 1 would be 4, and 4 times negative 14. We could use our calculator to help us with the arithmetic. Would be a negative 56. So we already have a subtraction sign, and we're going to subtract off a negative 56. And all of this is divided by 2. On our next line, we could simplify this. If you have a double negative, that could change to a plus sign. 5 plus or minus the square root of 25. Instead of putting the double negative, I'm putting a plus 56. Still, all this is divided by 2. X is equal to 5 plus or minus the square root. Add those values of 81. Divide by 2. Evaluate the square root of 81 as 9. And now we have to remember that the plus or minus means that we're going to split this into two possible solutions. X equals 5 plus a 9 over 2, which would be x equals 14 over 2, or x equals 7. That's one solution. And the other is to take 5 and subtract 9 and then divide by 2. 5 minus 9 would be a negative 4. Divide that by 2 and that would be a negative 2. Your other root or solution. If you want to write this in brackets as a solution set, you would put the negative 2 first, then a comma to separate the roots, and then the 7. Put the solutions in increasing order with a comma separating them and bracketed. The second question, again, we're using the quadratic formula. Even though it can be solved using factoring, we're asked to use the specific method. We have b squared minus 4b plus 4 equals 0. The equation equals 0, and it's in standard form, so we don't have to readjust any terms. We could go ahead, identify the a value to be 1, the b value to be negative 4, and the c value to be 4. And then go ahead and make your substitutions into the formula. x equals negative b, so that's going to be a negative 4, plus or minus the square root of b squared, put the b value in parentheses and square it, minus 4, it's a minus sign, minus 4 times a times c, make your substitutions, divide all of that by 2 times the a value, which is a 1. X is equal to, a negative 4 can change to be a positive 4, the negatives cancel each other out, plus or minus the square root, negative 4 in parentheses squared would be a 16, and then we're going to bring down the minus sign, and we have 4 times 1 times 4, which is 16. This is divided by 2. Next line, x is equal to 4 plus or minus. And see how I'm doing it step by step, and all my work is clear and it follows the step before it. That's what's expected when you submit your work. The square root of 0, and this is divided by 2. X is equal to 4 plus or minus. The square root of 0 is 0 over 2. Separate into 2 sections. 4 plus 0 divided by 2 is going to be 4 over 2, which is 2. X equals 2 is a solution. And then if we take x equals 4 minus 0 and divide by 2, it would also be 4 over 2, which is 2. You would get the same solution here, so there would be only one answer in the set. It would be brackets and then x equals 2. The third one, (2m squared plus 2m minus 12 is equal to 0. Again, it's in standard form already. Our a value would be a 2. Our b value would also be a 2. And our c value would be a negative 12. Make your substitutions into the formula. X equals negative b, so it's going to be a negative 2, plus or minus the square root of b, 2 squared, b squared, minus 4 times a, which is a 2, times c, which is a negative 12. The square root has to extend all that way. All of this is divided by 2 times a, and a is 1. I'm sorry, a is 2 this time. So we're going to do 2 times 2 in the denominator. X is equal to negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 2 squared is 4 minus, another way of doing this is to take the negative 4 and multiply by 2 and get a negative 8, and then multiply that negative 8 by a negative 12 and get a 96. So we're going to be adding a 96. You also could have decided to do another step and put a negative 96, which come out to be the same. We divide all this by a 4. X is equal to negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 100 over 4. Evaluate that square root of 100 to be 10, so it's going to be negative 2 plus or minus 10 over 4. Separate into 2 sections. Up here we're going to take negative 2 and we're going to add 10 to it, and then divide by 4. This is going to be an 8 over 4. X equals 2 is a solution. And the other option is to take x equals negative 2 minus 10, because it could be plus 10 or minus 10, and divide that by 4. Negative 2 minus 10 would be a negative 12. Divide that by 4, and that's a negative 3. Your other root or solution that's possible is a negative 3. In bracketed form, we would put the negative 3 first, then a comma to separate the roots, and then the higher root, which is a 2. That's the solution set way. And the last classwork that you had was number 4. 2x squared minus 3x minus 5 equals 0. All these today, as we first started this, were all in standard form and they were all equal to 0. so there were no need to move around terms. The a value has to be identified as 2, the b value has to be identified as a -3, and the c value has to be identified as a -5. X is equal to a -b, -3, plus or minus the square root of b squared. Make sure you put the -3 in parentheses and square it, minus 4 times a, which is a 2, times c, which is a -5. Extend the square root. Divide all of that by 2 times a, which is 2. So 2 times 2 in the denominator. Next line, x equals -3. The negatives cancel each other out, so there's a +3 now. Plus or minus the square root of parentheses -3 squared comes out as 9. -4 times 2 is -8. Times -5 is a +40. Divide all this by 4. That's in the denominator. Next line, x equals 3 plus or minus the square root of 49 over 4. The square root of 49 is evaluated as a 7, so we have 3 plus or minus 7 over 4. And let's evaluate using the plus or minus idea. Up here, we're going to do x is equal to 3 plus the 7 over 4. So this is going to be 10/4. You can reduce this to be 5/2, and it's okay that it's not a whole number. This would be a 2.5. Best to leave it as a 5/2. That's one solution. And then we also could have 3 minus 7 divided by 4. 3 minus 7 is a -4. When we divide by 4, it's a -1. That's your other root. Bracket this up. In a solution set method, we would put the -1 first, since it's our lowest root. And then we would put the 5/2. It's okay to leave it as a fraction. You don't have to make it a mixed number or a mixed decimal. That's your solution set for this example.